There is a version of you that you have never met. It has been alive since the day you were born. It knows every secret you have ever buried, every impulse you have ever crushed, every thought you were too ashamed to finish. And right now, while you read this sentence, it is sitting somewhere inside your mind, waiting. Carl Jung had a name for it. He called it the shadow, and he believed that until you face it, you are not actually free. You are just performing. Here is the strange part. The people who seem the calmest, the kindest, the most put together, are often hiding the darkest shadows of all. Why would that be true? Why would the nicest person in the room be the one carrying the most buried rage, the most buried shame, the most buried desire? Stay with this, because the answer will change how you see every person you have ever judged, including yourself. Jung believed that every human being is born whole, not good, not bad. Whole, a newborn does not know the difference between anger and love, between jealousy and generosity. All of it lives together, unfiltered, unashamed. But that wholeness does not survive childhood. It cannot, because the moment a child starts to live among other people, a quiet negotiation begins. Some parts of you are rewarded. Smile, and mother smiles back. Ask a smart question, and father says good job. Other parts of you are punished. Cry too loud, and you are told to stop. Get angry, and you are told that is not who we raise you to be. Want something too badly, and you are called selfish. And so, without ever choosing it, a child begins to split in two. One half becomes the mask the world can see. The other half gets pushed into the dark. Jung called that visible half the persona, from the Latin word for a theater mask. And he called the hidden half the shadow. Every trait you were ever punished for, every feeling you were ever told to swallow, does not disappear. It goes underground. It waits. This is where the story gets uncomfortable, because the shadow is not just anger or sadness. Sometimes the most repressed thing about a person is not their darkness. It is their brilliance. A child raised by parents who felt threatened by intelligence may learn to hide how smart they are. A child raised by parents obsessed with modesty may learn to hide their ambition. So the shadow is not only made of what disgusts us, it is also made of what we were never allowed to become. Think about that for a second, because it explains something that has probably confused you your entire life. Have you ever met someone who irritated you instantly, for no clear reason? You could not explain it. They had done nothing wrong to you, and yet something about them made your skin crawl. Jung had an explanation for that too, and it is one of the most unsettling ideas in all of psychology. He called it projection. And here is how it works. The traits we cannot stand in other people are almost always the traits we have buried in ourselves. If arrogance disgusts you, some hidden part of you fears its own arrogance. If laziness enrages you, some buried part of you is terrified of being lazy. Your shadow does not stay quietly locked away. It escapes through your judgments. It hides behind your finger, pointing at someone else. This means that every person who has ever irritated you, without a clear reason, has actually been holding up a mirror, showing you a piece of yourself you buried so long ago, you forgot it was even yours. And most people never realize it. They spend their whole lives reacting to the outside world, never suspecting that the outside world is often just reflecting something buried inside them. So, what happens to a person who never looks in that mirror? What happens when the shadow is left in the dark for decades? The answer is far more dangerous than most people assume. Jung warned that whatever is denied in the mind does not vanish. It grows. Unexamined anger becomes cruelty that leaks out sideways, in sarcasm, in coldness, in small cruelties disguised as jokes. Unexamined shame becomes self-sabotage, the strange pattern of ruining good things right when they start to work. Unexamined desire becomes obsession, an emptiness that no achievement, no relationship, No amount of success can ever fully satisfy. The shadow does not ask for permission to surface. It finds a way out, one way or another. Jung put it bluntly, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That single idea should stop you cold. How many decisions in your life have felt like fate? Like patterns you could not escape? Like the same argument happening in every relationship? The same fear sabotaging every opportunity? What if none of that was fate at all? What if it was your shadow, running the show from behind a curtain you never thought to open? Jung did not arrive at this idea sitting comfortably in a lecture hall. He arrived at it after nearly losing his own mind. In his 40s, after a bitter and public break with Sigmund Freud, Jung entered a period he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. For years he had visions he could not explain. He heard voices. He carved stone. He built an entire tower by hand on the edge of a lake, brick by brick, as if some part of him needed to build a home for the pieces of himself he had never let live. Colleagues quietly wondered if he was losing his sanity. What they did not understand was that Jung was doing, in the most extreme way possible, exactly what he would later ask the rest of us to do in smaller, safer ways. He was descending into his own shadow. And instead of being destroyed by it, he came back with the theory that would define the rest of his life's work. There is a reason this feels so personal, and it is because Jung was not writing about strangers. He was writing about a war happening quietly inside every single one of us. The persona wants to be liked, the shadow wants to be whole. And for most of human history, the persona has been winning. Society rewards the mask. It applauds people who seem calm, agreeable, easy to be around. It rarely applauds people who admit their rage, their envy, their fear. So we learn, generation after generation, to bury the shadow deeper and call it maturity. But here is the twist that Jung spent his life trying to prove. Burying the shadow does not make a person more good. It makes them less whole. And a person who is not whole is dangerous, not because they are evil, but because parts of them are operating without their own awareness. This is how kind people explode in ways that shock everyone who knows them. This is how quiet people snap. This is how a calm household can hold a secret storm for 20 years and then break apart overnight. The shadow was never gone. It was only waiting for the moment the mask could no longer hold. Now here is where the story turns, because Jung did not believe the shadow was something to defeat. He believed it was something to integrate. That word matters more than almost any other word in his entire body of work. Not destroy. Not suppress. Integrate. Because the shadow, as frightening as it sounds, is not your enemy. It is the missing half of you. Jung believed that real strength, real depth, real wisdom only becomes possible once a person stops running from that missing half and starts turning toward it. He did not mean this as some abstract philosophy meant only for scholars. He meant it as a practical, daily, almost physical act. The simple willingness to notice a feeling instead of instantly explaining it away. To sit with an uncomfortable thought for one extra second instead of reaching for a distraction. Think about what that actually requires. It means sitting with the memory of the moment you were cruel to someone you loved instead of explaining it away. It means admitting the flicker of satisfaction you felt when someone you envied failed instead of pretending you never noticed. It means facing the fact that you are capable of things you have spent your whole life insisting you would never do. This is not comfortable work. Jung once wrote that people would rather be certain they are right than risk being whole, because wholeness demands honesty, and honesty demands courage most people never build. But something extraordinary happens to the people who do this work anyway. Their relationships change first, because they stop projecting their hidden anger, their hidden fear, their hidden shame onto the people closest to them. The arguments that used to come from nowhere start making sense, because they finally see where the reaction was really coming from. their creativity often expands too. Because so much psychological energy had been spent guarding the shadow that once it is faced, that energy becomes available again, fueling work, art, ambition, and clarity that was buried under decades of self-suppression. People who once described themselves as blocked, stuck, or numb often describe this shift as waking up from a fog they did not know they were living in, as if a locked door somewhere inside them had finally been found and opened. And there is something even stranger that Jung observed, something that sounds almost like a paradox. The people who become the most compassionate are not the ones who never had darkness. They are the ones who faced their own darkness so directly that they can no longer judge it in anyone else. A person who has met their own capacity for cruelty stops being shocked by cruelty in others. A person who has faced their own selfishness stops being so quick to condemn it elsewhere. Facing the shadow does not make a person harsher. It makes them almost impossible to shock, and strangely, far easier to forgive. Picture an ordinary example, one that plays out in millions of homes without anyone noticing what is really happening. A father raises his son with one unspoken rule: boys do not cry. Every time the boy's tears start to rise, they are met with a sharp voice, a disappointed look, a quiet message that sadness is weakness. The boy learns fast. He stops crying. By the time he is an adult, he genuinely believes he does not feel sadness much at all. He seems steady. He seems strong. People admire how little seems to rattle him. But the sadness never left. It only went underground, and underground, it changed shape. It came back out as irritability toward his own children when they cried. It came back out as a strange coldness whenever his wife needed comfort. It came back out as a quiet, permanent numbness he could never quite explain, even to himself. He was not choosing to be distant. His shadow was making the choice for him, and he never even knew it was in the room. Now picture the version of that same man 20 years later. In a moment Jung would have called the beginning of real change. His son cries in front of him, and instead of the old sharp reflex, something stops him. He notices the irritation rising in his chest, and for the first time he asks the question instead of acting on it. Why does this bother me so much? And slowly, uncomfortably, the memory surfaces. His own father's voice. His own buried tears. In that single pause, something shifts that no amount of willpower could have shifted before. Because he is no longer reacting from the shadow. He is finally looking at it. This is what Jung meant when he said, the shadow, once made conscious, loses its grip. Not because it disappears, but because it can no longer hide behind the illusion that it was never there. So how does a person actually begin this work? Jung believed the process starts with something deceptively simple: paying attention to your own reactions. The next time someone irritates you far more than the situation seems to justify, pause before reacting. Ask yourself a question most people never think to ask. What if this feeling is not about them at all? What if this is a part of me I have never wanted to look at? That single question, asked honestly again and again over years, is what Jung called the beginning of individuation, the long, uncomfortable, often lonely process of becoming a complete person instead of a curated performance of one. This is also why Jung believed dreams mattered so much, because the conscious mind can control what it says, what it shows, what it performs for the world, but the unconscious mind does not perform. It leaks the truth while you sleep. The people you cannot stand in your dreams, the situations that terrify you, the figures that chase you through nightmares, are often disguised messages from the shadow, trying to be seen. Jung spent decades studying his own dreams for exactly this reason. Not to interpret them like fortune-telling, but to listen to the parts of himself that his waking mind refused to acknowledge. He kept a detailed record of these dreams for years, treating each one less like a puzzle to solve and more like a letter from a part of himself he had never properly met, patiently reading what that part of him was trying. in its strange symbolic language, to finally say. Jung also believed the shadow shows up somewhere far bigger than individual lives. And this part of his theory is the one that should genuinely unsettle you. He warned that entire nations, entire cultures, can develop a collective shadow, a shared pile of everything a society refuses to admit about itself. And when a group of people cannot see their own darkness, they do exactly what an individual does. They find someone else to carry it for them. History is full of moments where an entire population convinced itself it was righteous while projecting its cruelty onto an enemy, a scapegoat, an outsider. Jung watched this happen in his own lifetime, in his own country, and it terrified him, because he understood that the same mechanism hiding inside one irritated person judging a stranger is the same mechanism capable of justifying atrocity on a massive scale, once enough people refuse to look inward at the same time. There is a reason this idea has quietly taken over modern psychology, therapy, and self-help, even among people who have never read a single page Jung wrote. Almost every modern conversation about triggers, about inner child work, about breaking generational patterns, about why we repeat the same relationship over and over, traces back to this one core idea. What we do not face, we repeat. What we bury, we become. And what we refuse to see in ourselves, we will spend our whole lives seeing and hating in everyone around us. This is not a comfortable ending, and Jung never promised one. He did not believe in a version of self-improvement where you simply think positive thoughts and the darkness disappears. He believed the darkness never disappears. It only stops running your life once you stop pretending it is not there. The goal was never to become a person without a shadow. That person does not exist, and Jung would have said that person is the most dangerous kind of all, because their darkness is simply hiding somewhere they have never bothered to look. The goal, instead, was to become a person who no longer flinches at their own reflection. Someone who can say, yes, I am capable of pettiness, and I choose something else. Yes, I have felt rage I am ashamed of, and I am allowed to feel it without becoming it. Yes, there are parts of me I used to hide, and hiding them cost me more than facing them ever could. That is not weakness. Jung believed that was the closest thing to real strength a human being could achieve. Not the absence of darkness, but the courage to stand beside it without looking away. This is why he once wrote that people do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, because it is only by looking directly at what we fear in ourselves that fear finally loses its power over us. So here is the deeper question this leaves behind, one worth sitting with long after this video ends. If the traits that irritate you most in other people are often reflections of what you have buried in yourself, what is your own shadow trying to show you right now? Whose flaws have you been judging the hardest lately? And what might it mean if the real reason is not them at all, but something inside you that has been waiting years to finally be seen? What would change in your life, your relationships, your sense of peace, if you finally stopped hiding from that part of yourself? Jung once said that we are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become. And choosing to become whole starts with the uncomfortable decision to finally stop looking away. If this made you think differently about yourself, even for a moment, that is exactly where real change begins. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and stay. Because the next story goes even deeper into the mind Carl Jung spent his whole life trying to understand.